Well, joining me now to discuss what the Wikileaks documents say about how the US views its allies is Brendan O'Connor. He's an associate professor at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Happy to come in.
From your perspective, just how damaging, how dangerous are these leaks to the United States and its international standing?
Well, they're embarrassing. They're very embarrassing. They're great to read for a historian like myself. We usually have to wait 20 or 30 years to get this behind-the-scenes coverage of events. I think they'll give a sense that the US maybe cannot be trusted. Some of its sources that have given the US various bits of information around the world might think twice before speaking to the US again. And it's incredible how easy it was to access. This soldier in Iraq, Bradley Manning, gets a CD which he pretends he's listening to Lady Gaga and downloads 250,000 documents, a real history of American diplomatic cables. And so extraordinary bits of information, but more gossip and tidbits and embarrassments at the moment rather than anything which strikes me as being, crucial or an incredibly damaging revelation.
In terms of damaging revelations, though, one theme in the leaked cables is an exhortation by a number of Arab states for the US to take military action against Iran to try and stop Iran developing a nuclear weapon. How do you think these disclosures could affect thinking in Tehran? What could it do to Middle East relations between some key states?
Yeah, I think this is probably generally well known that Saudi Arabia has very big concerns about a growing Iranian influence in the Gulf. So it makes many of the things that are said behind closed doors more public. Diplomacy is sometimes described as sending your best women and men abroad to lie for your country. And diplomacy often happens that way. You have harsh assessments often of foreign leaders. Politicians often have harsh assessments of each other. Think of Obama and Hillary Clinton's assessments of each other, but then ultimately have to work together and smooth over problems. So I think there's probably a bit of that. The Middle East is a tricky place. So it's great press, but I don't think it's that kind of news.
Talking of harsh assessments, from what we've learned so far, what to you is the most glaring contrast between the public statements or the perceived opinion of the US about a certain nation or leader versus what's being revealed here?
Well, I think the continued revelations about the Karzai government are the things that are of most importance. The Karzai government is one that our own Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition have tried to sort of build up in the recent parliamentary debate on this issue. And it's just a government with so many flaws and so many problems, such a high level of corruption. So the details about the level of corruption, maybe money laundering details, it just adds to the weight of evidence that things in Afghanistan are very difficult. Supporting the Karzai government is a very hard and unfortunate road, maybe the only choice the West has, but it is a very difficult process. And these leaks, like the earlier WikiLeaks, really just, take away the credibility of the Karzai government if there is any credibility left.
More on that, how do these series of leaks differ to those about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars?
They're more of a diplomatic nature. The earlier leaks were largely about the military fights in Afghanistan and previously in Iraq. They talked a lot about US tactics, maybe the harshness of US treatment occasionally of captives. These are interesting for those who follow European politics. Some of the assessments of people like Sarkozy described as being vulgar and poorly house-trained. I'm not sure what that exactly means. Does it mean he's messy or doesn't flush the toilet? Or there's tidbits like that against Angela Merkel, describing her as vacillating and weak. Some of the British press have picked up on some of the commentary about various British politicians. So that's fascinating to know what the diplomatic gossip is. And it makes the nature of the leaks is much broader. There'll be, I think, a few interesting things that will come out about Australia. So it's a much broader... Well, probably a cold sort of assessment like it comes out in the British reporting. So US reporting from the British Embassy in London is much more interest-based, far less sentimental than the notion of, say, a special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States might suggest. And there's probably going to be a bit of that with regard to Australia, describing Australia as, I think as you said in the lead-in, as loyal, but maybe a little bit of a sort of underwhelming player or not particularly effective on the world stage on, say, a big issue like Zimbabwe. So there'll be a few things like that that will be embarrassing, and probably neither ally or the United States would like out there. But, you know, there's so many documents. I think this won't just be a few days. It will go on for a number of weeks.
Well, we'll have to await those mentioning Australia. In the Guardian newspaper website, I noticed a writer has said that in future the only secrets will be the spoken ones that can be safe. How do you think this episode could change the whole nature of diplomatic reporting and communication? And will it mean a world where that reporting is less forthright and frank if people don't think, well, this is actually secret?
Yeah, that could be the really unfortunate side to this. The one side of it is that getting information out there about the US treatment of various prisoners, captives, maybe the US, there's claims that the US bombed some refugee camps in Yemen. These kinds of things I think are important about accountability. But on the negative side, you want diplomats to be very frank to politicians and tell them about local conditions, to be realistic, to put that in writing. And I imagine if these diplomats pull back from that, or local sources don't trust the United States, then the United States is not getting good information, and sometimes politicians maybe over-egg the case for a certain argument, and they need this type of information.
Well, Brendan O'Connor, Associate Professor at the US Studies Centre from the University of Sydney, I thank you for your time tonight.
My pleasure.